Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. My name's Jake. I'm hanging out with Andre again to break down some self-development topics. And today we have a kind of wide-reaching one, but essentially it comes down to the idea of well-being in general. And what does that mean, and what should we be sacrificing for well-being? This is a really big topic, and all of us have goals in life. Some of them are conscious goals, some of them are unconscious goals, but many of us are seeking something. We're trying to make more money. We're trying to get the right relationship. We're trying to accomplish something. We're trying to quote unquote be happy. There's all these drives that we have. And if you really dig deep enough under some of those goals, it all comes back to we're really all just trying to optimize for well-being. We're all just trying to, look in the mirror and feel good about ourselves. And well-being and like emotional states often get tied together. And I don't think that's the case. At least that's not the angle I want to take on this episode. Well-being is much broader than feeling happy. Happiness is an emotional state. It comes and goes. It's relative. Like, you can't be happy if you don't have unhappiness in your life, because you're always fighting the hedonic treadmill and everything's relative. So you need ups and downs in life to feel emotion. Well-being is more of a concept than a temporary state. It's something that is much wider. It's emotional health, which part of that is having positive emotions, but it's not the only part of it. It's psychological health, mental health, and it's physical health, and dare I even say spiritual health to some degree. It's really this overarching thing of just well-being. And maybe I'll pause there. I don't know. I feel like I've talked a lot. Andre, do you have any takes on well-being before we dive into some of the details here?
Yeah, well-being means something different to everybody. Kind of like happiness means something different to everybody, and love means something different to everybody. But I think that for the purposes of our discussion, we need to kind of have like a closer to a short definition that we can kind of work off of. And for me, my definition of well-being is um, alignment and peace. Like, you're doing all of the things that you find valuable, and you're feeling at peace. And people are tempted to define it as, I feel happy, so my felt sense of well-being is high. I actually think of happiness as kind of a calculation error, which is like, oh, things turned out better than I think they should have. So that's why it's very dangerous to fall into the trap of constantly chasing happiness, right? And I think that that's like very linked up with the hedonic treadmill thing that you were talking about, right? But maybe, if they didn't understand what the hedonic treadmill was initially, that's a little bit easier of a definition for people to go by, right? Chasing happiness, and with happiness being a calculation error where things turned out better than you felt like it should have, that kind of gives people a little bit of perspective with which to kind of digest what's going on with the well-being conversation.
Yeah, and I think this directly ties in the next point I want to talk about, which is like how do we get well-being? And we can start with it's not the hedonic treadmill, that's for sure. And the hedonic treadmill is we all have a baseline. So the most common example with the hedonic treadmill is like winning the lottery. You win the lottery and then you feel really good, and it has all this positive emotion comes in, and it's so much fun to spend this money and et cetera, et cetera. But then over time you adapt, and you just hit a new baseline. So your quality of life went up. Yes, you can measure that your quality of life maybe went down, depending on how you spent your money, right? Plenty of people doesn't fare very well. But how you feel inside, your well-being did not go up, right? Like, sure, you maybe had a boost in positive emotions for a while, but everything gets leveled back out. And this gets back into the idea of like, okay, so how do we get well-being in our life? And the way I like to think about this is there's sort of like three big takes on not necessarily well-being, but like humans in general, like what drives us humans. And the first one that I think, and just to be clear up front, I think all of these are true in some ways. It just depends on like what's most effective for well-being. So the first one that comes to mind is Freud, which I think is the default of what a lot of people think, and that is we seek pleasure, we avoid pain. Those two things. And of course there's a lot to that. That is very true. But there's other takes too. So the second take is, I think, most commonly associated with a psychologist named Adler, who is not quite as famous as Freud, but has really good thoughts. I actually like him quite a bit more than Freud. Um, and that is the will to power, which means people seek power. They want control over situations, and that essentially like that's what drives us. And I guess maybe you can reason beyond that that like if I have power, I will have well being. And once again, I think that's a component of it. Um, and the will to power thing too, I think ultimately gets tied back to Nietzsche. Nietzsche was kind of like one of the original, like the existentialist philosopher, kind of founded this, and he's really smart. So is Adler. I think there's a lot of truth to it. And lastly, which is the thing that I like to put a lot of emphasis on, is meaning, the will to meaning. And the psychologist that is most common associated with this would be Viktor Frankl, and he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is an amazing book. And it, too long didn't read. It gets down to the point of like you need a strong why in your life. If you have a strong why, you can get through anything. If you have meaning, you can get through anything. And the way I like to think about this is, and this is a very common thing in like, you'll see it everywhere if you read any sort of self-development or self-growth books. They're all going to talk about a why. Very little do they talk about like, oh, you should go do things that make you feel good. It doesn't work. That's just dopamine, and it doesn't actually last, right? It's a temporary thing. Hit on a treadmill. The power thing, I don't know if that's discussed as much in like common things, but like I do think there's something to that. And I mean, we could even get into like some of like the like Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, like the social hierarchy and like climbing the social hierarchy and how that has to do with your physical well-being, how it affects you at different levels. So I think there's a lot of truth to that too, but I want to kind of rein in the conversation on the reason why being important is kind of like the foundational. If you're going to nail one thing for well-being, nail your why. So I've been talking really high level about all this stuff because I think it is really high level stuff. And Andre, I think you're really good at sort of getting like bringing me back down to the ground and getting a little bit more tangible at this. I don't know. What's your take on everything I just said?
All right. So the power thing, I think that we can translate that into people want to have a sense of agency, like that they can do what they want and do it on their own schedule. And it's basically like when I was listening to all of it, I'm like, yes, meaning goes at the top. Um, Power is our ability to find and chase our meaning because of the agency thing, and then we have to deal with the dopamine and the chasing pleasures, accepting pains, avoiding pains, right? So it's almost like the meaning thing and finding your why is what kind of is the culmination of all of the previous things. Because from what I recall, the meaning thing with Frankel, I believe that happened later, right? That was like a chronologically that happened after the previous two, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think the order in which these things occur, like, I mean, it depends. And they don't all need to exist at the same time, I don't think. It's kind of like figuring out what pieces are you missing in life. And often, yeah, the why I think comes later. I don't think we think about it too much in our life. Like we don't, pop out of the womb and be like, well, this is why I'm alive. Like it usually somebody tells us why we're alive or we fall into whatever belief system. So I think generally people, and maybe I'm just speaking from personal experience, but like generally follow some of these other things first. Like they follow the will to pleasure, where it's like, well, I just need to do things that feel good, and we follow the power thing. And the why. I mean, there's some argument on the why too, of does the why exist? Can you find the why, or does like the why sort of come? Does it get created over time? And it makes me think of the idea like um, there's one book I'm like there's one book I'm thinking of. I want to say it's by Cal Newport, but I can't remember the exact book. But it's the idea that your passion, you don't find your passion, like you're passionate about what you're good at. So like I think he used the example in the book. I hope I'm giving credit where credit's due, but we'll put it in the comments or something if I totally cited the wrong author. Um, you like nobody's excited about like accounting, right? Like nobody's passionate about accounting, but people are passionate about accounting because they get good at it and it allows them to afford a life that is valuable, that allows them to have valuable things in life and to experience life. It gives them that agency part, like that power component to it. So yeah, it's a really interesting subject to dive into. It's not always as black and white as just like, oh, what speaks to you? Like it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, there's a lot of linkages between each of those different spots. Like you it almost feels like a chronological development of how you're supposed to do things if you're on the self-development path. You like understand the pleasure and pain responses, understand that agency is valuable, and then chase something meaningful and create enough whys to kind of make you keep the first two in order. Like that's what it feels like to me. It's like you keep the first two in order, the pleasure and pain response and then the agency and power so that you can chase the meaning. And that's really what it feels like to me based on this. I'm not actually that educated on all of these things. Like I recognize some of the names. I haven't read the books, but I can tell that some of these things are showing up in popular culture and like people are aware of the fact that they exist, but they don't really know what it is. And starting to understand what it is really helps you to kind of organize your life to optimize for a felt sense of well being and ultimately aligning yourself with the whys, which is ultimately the way you get the most out of life, right? Organizing your life around pursuing the most meaningful things that you can do.
Right. And like we mentioned before, you don't need all three of these. You can exist in life totally. I don't want to say good, but like there's a lot of people out there just chasing dopamine and pleasure, right? Like that's a lot of us are doing that, and we all have some component of that in our lives. And the power thing too. I mean, that's very big in the business world. You know what I mean? Like I can think of plenty of people in my head, like icons, business icons that like reading between the lines, it's like, well, what's driving them is like there's a will to power. Like they're very driven by this power thing. Of course, that's an assumption. And then there's other people who have this deep why, and you can pursue pleasure and you can pursue power, but those can also be huge traps. Like you can really shoot yourself in the foot if you don't have a why. And resting your well-being on pursuing pleasure doesn't work. Resting it on power probably doesn't necessarily always work either because you're not always going to feel good. But if you're doing something with and you know the reason why, and you can look back onto it, you wake up early for something, or you do something that's hard, you grind through something. You may not feel good, you may be exhausted, but if you can point back to that why behind it, I mean that's why I think, like the second you have kids, like you get this deep why in your life. That's one of the benefits of, that's biologically built in. We have to care for these things. It's a really great way to manufacture meaning in your life is like have a family and have kids. Of course,
Yeah.
it's not the only way. There's other ways to do it. Um, but if you don't have that why not just go get wasted tonight? Why not stay up late and eat pizza and do whatever? It's like, why not? I got nothing else going for me. But if you have a reason to wake up in the morning, you start to make some of these longer term decisions and stop focusing so much on the short term.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that like it felt like the frame we were discussing is kind of slanting towards the people at the top of the power hierarchy when we're talking about the power part. But there's a pretty common power component that's showing up that happened directly because of the Rona, right? It's the expectation to be able to work from home and work flexible hours. That's power. That's part of it, and that's something that most of us can actually identify with. It's not only the CEOs and all of those C-suite people and the business owners and the founders that get all of the blend of power optimization. We have our own smaller areas where we're looking for power, and the easiest one to point at is like these small areas of agency where we get to pick how we organize our lives, and that's super important.
Yeah, I think that's something we both share as a value too, is like agency in life. Like having, I mean, this is where people take, the entrepreneurship path in life and try to, have more control over their life, right? So they can shape it. And it's absolutely required to have, well, I mean, it depends on how far off we want to go. There's a whole end of the spectrum of all these things are so fascinating to break down, because it's like we have the side of self growth, which is pure acceptance, right? It's like, well, yeah, if you accept all conditions, you don't need power, right? Because you have accepted it all and everything's great. And that's great if you're Buddha, right? But we're not all Buddha. We still want things and we still need to exist, and we don't sit in a cave and meditate all day. And having that sense of control in your life really goes a long way. But if you have that control and you don't, or you aren't putting it towards something that is valuable, like you're not going to have well-being in your life, because you're just going to, I don't know, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with your time? And I think a lot of people do that. They chase these false goals in their life. And, I think about this too, is like sometimes like maybe you do have to chase the wrong goal to really learn. That certainly is the quickest way to learn, is to be like, you know what? I need this in my life. And then to get it, and then to be like, that didn't actually work.
Yeah, that
Like
that
it's
had
the
no
clearest
effect.
message.
That had
Yeah.
no effect. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's dangerous. And then, like, total random side note is like, one thing I really hope they figure out is like, I don't know if it's VR or if it's like directly plugging your brain into a computer, is to simulate, like, here's your, like, think your ideal life. Like, what do you want your ideal life to be like? And then like allow you to experience that life like in fast forward, and then be like, oh, actually, I don't know, that wasn't actually the life I wanted. And sometimes I start to wonder, maybe that's what we're doing right now. Like maybe we are in a simulation that is simulating some like life goal, and like we're learning if this is the life we want to live or not. But I think that would really speed things up if we could just fail faster in life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Um, I like the idea of stacking several Ys and then kind of assigning values to them. Like just like this is my number one, this is my number two, this is my number three. If you want to get even more specific, you can even be like, this one is worth 10 widgets, this one is worth 7 widgets, and this one's only worth two. So and organizing your life around optimizing for the ones that get you the most number of widgets, you know. That's that's my nerdy way of breaking down well-being. I have to assign numbers to it. It's funny because there's the chasing wise aspect of getting your felt sense of well-being up, and then there's the gratitude, acceptance, and non-comparing way. That's kind of like the Buddha thing you were talking about. Like if you
Yeah.
wanted to be 100% happy right now, you stop all sense of comparison with everybody and yourself, and you just exist, right? But that's not very reasonable, especially if you have a family. You have to optimize for different things. Yeah.
Yeah, like if you can do that, teach me how. Good luck. We live in reality. We're human beings. Sure, that it is a very important piece to consider in our lives and our well-being journey, is to make sure that we accept that we don't need everything, and be realistic about expectations, etc., etc. But on the flip side, it's okay to to want things. It's okay to pursue things, and especially if it's driven by some sort of meaning, right? Like you look at, there's always this argument I have, and I'm not sure who I stole this argument from. I'm sure I directly lifted it from somebody on some podcast somewhere, but it's like the measure of impact. Like if you really look at who has had impact in the world, right? Like you look at people like Bill Gates, Elon Musk, like they're filthy rich. And but they've turned that into this power to be able to act on some sort of meaning, right? So like even though it's often shallow to pursue money, money is just a often just a proxy for power and control and being able to do or in order to exercise your why, right? And you can really have a much bigger impact if you have resources. So having resources, maximizing widgets, whatever it may be, as part of your story and part of the well-being journey, it makes sense. We don't like talking about it because we all want to pretend we're perfect and don't have desires, right? But it's part of the equation.
Yeah, it has to be. And especially at the very beginning of it, like you have to get certain things taken care of, or else you cannot actually relax and do things that provide you pure meaning because you have to take care of certain things and you don't really have much of a choice there. I mean, you do have a choice. It's just not optimal. Like you have to hit a certain level of quality of living and safety before you can reach out to some of the other things that are a little bit more of a lofty goal, you know? Um, so yeah, I think that I think about money as kind of like stored energy. We store our energy there. Like we trade our energy to get money, and then we try and take that energy that's stored and then get more energy or apply it to something that we want to see change for ourselves or others, right? So it's all this like balancing act in order to change your felt sense of wellness, you know? Like we need to accomplish things in order to have a good sense of well-being because that's how we navigate life with everybody else is this ability to measure meaning, show each other meaning, have meaning that overlaps with someone else's meaning, and then go and like do something really big. Those are all like highly valuable things to do.
Right, right. And the meaning thing too, when we're talking about, I think a lot of I'll speak for myself instead of projecting onto to people listening. I have made the mistake of judging my own whys at like too much of a like feeling like they're too low level. But the lower level your why is, the easier it is to translate that into goals and to take action in the world. The higher level your goal is, the much harder it is to translate that into specific things. So like your high level why may be a bit intangible, right? It may touch into the spiritual realm or the religious realm or like whatever it is, but it's hard always to tie that back to a specific goal or something. It's like just take a Buddhist. Maybe your goal is to be enlightened. You're like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like you bring it all the way back down to more earthly level goals, and you're like, well, you know what? Maybe I need a solid foundation in my life before I can become enlightened. Before I can become a good person and go out and change the world, I need to take care of myself. I need to have a place to live. I need food on the table. I need stable relationships. Like these are very low level things that are actually really meaningful if you really think about them and connect them to these higher level whys. So I think once again, I in the past have gotten stuck on either too high of a why that's too out there or judging too low of a why and judging that it's superficial or something.
Yeah, that's a very common thing for us as humans to do. Like we want to like, approach God as far as like what our goals are. Like a why can be like I want to make a positive impact on the world. That's too general, right? You can bring it down and be like, okay, I have this set of skill sets. How can I like actually make that positive impact. It could be I can teach people how to become a part-time entrepreneur. That could be super impactful. I've done that. I did it so that I can take care of my baby at the time. Like I was like, okay, well, how am I going to do this? And then maybe I can help uh, other dads or potentially moms be able to kind of make half an income in the times that the baby's napping or in the times that the baby's asleep, and that's a real impact. That is making an impact. That's you have to like start general and then get like more and more actionable. And like we a part-time entrepreneurship thing, that's a big goal. That's probably like something more along the 3 to 5 years kind of timeline, like building out a full system, getting like samples and optimizing and all of that. That's a 3 to 5 year goal. But we got even further down, and it's like, how do I get seen? Right? Like, you could get seen by posting on social media. You can get seen by all kinds of different small things. So I guess that's a long way of saying like you have to have all kinds of different levels of clarity in order to line up and get to your why. And when you get to your why, that's about as close as we can get to having our sense of well-being shoot straight up.
Right. Right. And not everything has to be completely figured out. Like whys change. There's different seasons of life. Things are going to big events are going to happen in your life, and it's going to dramatically shift your priorities and your whys. That's just part of living. Like you just gotta embrace it and consistently check in with yourself and have a method of making sure you're returning back to your whys on a regular basis. All levels of whys, like question your big whys, question your lower level whys, and your goals and how they tie together. Um, and then it's not about feeling good anymore, right? It's you quit worrying about feeling good, and the side effect of that, you start feeling good. That's the
It's
trick.
yeah, it's a funny little paradox.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, maybe just to wrap this up, we can talk about a couple. I took some notes on some tools that I've personally used on finding my whys. So one that I have found a ton of value in, and I've done it a few times, is writing your own eulogy. So you sit down and you pretend that somebody that you just died. You're dead. You're in the grave. It's all over. There's nothing else you can do. And somebody's writing a eulogy for you. They lived like this. They accomplished XYZ. They had touched people's lives in this way. Like, how do you want to be remembered? There's really not a quicker way I have thought of like really jumping to your why than pretending like you're dead, because that's like that's the end, right? Of at least the end that we can understand. And then you start to work backwards from there. So now you have your outcome, right? And then you project back and say, okay, well, what does that look like in minus 10 years, minus 20, minus 30, all the way up to where you're at. I don't know. I'll pause there. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, it can be a little dark. You don't want to imagine you're dead, right? But sometimes you need to kick yourself in the ass to remember that.
Yeah, I think that's a really useful tool. It's very understandable for people, right? That there's nothing that hits you at a higher level than the things that would be mentioned at a funeral, right? Like that's you're not getting past 2 or 3 bullet points. You better make sure that those bullet points are worth talking about, you know? Like you're not gonna uh show up to a eulogy and then see like 14 bullet points. Like you're gonna get known for sometimes one thing, maybe two. If you're very lucky, there's 3 things worth talking about. And then the rest of it will be wishy-washy stuff. So if it's important for you to hit certain major goals, then you got to make sure that you're aligning your life to do that.
Yep, align those lower level whys and those goals all the way up to those higher level ones. Like that is alignment. That's internal alignment. And yeah, starting at the end is a great place to do that. Um, One other one that is I find really fascinating because this is something I've continuously seen throughout my career. So part of my career has been, I'm trying to be high level because I don't want to like go into all the details, but it's like it's understanding people's needs and solving them. Okay, I'll just get practical. I've been a product designer for a very long time, so creating software and applications for people, sometimes consumer facing applications, sometimes more business internal systems. And it's all about it just comes to all about solving problems. So you just have to deeply understand somebody's problem, and then you have to solve it. And one thing that I've learned through doing that is it comes with a lot of, I've learned that you have to rely on observation of other people. You can't rely on what they say. And so you can ask somebody what they want, and they'll answer you, and they'll have a reason. Generally, that's not actually what they want. Like they're a few steps removed from what they actually want because they're already coming up with a solution to it. And the funny thing is, it's the same thing for ourselves. Like we literally can't listen to yourselves. You have to observe yourself. And this is where tracking data, really deep self-reflection, and being aware of things that you're like, why did I act that way? Like in a moment I responded this way. Like, why did I act that way? Or I say that I want to do this, but I spend all my time watching Netflix. Like, why is that? Like, there's probably a reason behind that. So you can say, I want this, I'm going to do this, etc. But take a deep look at how you're actually showing up in the world and like look at like study yourself. Like you're, like making a documentary about yourself and you're reading between the lines and like, oh, look at this silly little creature. He's doing this thing, but he didn't say he was going to do that. Why is he doing that? And you can start to figure out what you value based on how you act. Sometimes you find out that you don't like your values, like maybe you value tuning out instead of being present in life. I've been there. But once you observe those, like you can start to reverse engineer what you value and maybe even like shift what you value towards something that you appreciate more.
Yeah, without self reflection, you can't really get to understanding and shifting values to be in alignment with that eulogy you're talking about. Um, I like the eulogy thing. I like gathering the data, but I use a slightly different frame in that I like to think about things in vision and anti-vision, where I'm running away from a why and I am chasing a different one. So like the most common run away from a why is like I don't want to be broke as fuck, right? And then your actual lofty why could be like I want to make an impact on my community, right? So like those I think that that's like a very approachable framework for anybody who wants to like accomplish a big goal. That's a good starting place. That or writing your eulogy and seeing if you're aligning with the eulogy that you want to be told at your funeral, right?
Right. And I love the point on like an anti-vision. Something we talk about a lot is like humans being naturally negative bias, right? Like it's very easy to identify like things you don't like in other people or
Yeah.
things you don't like in yourself. And they often say that when you're exploring your values, trying to figure out your values, like one of the prompts is often what just drives you nuts about other people. You just see it and you're just like, oh, it's like that just irks me. And often that is the opposite of one of your values, right? Like you value something and they're doing the opposite and it's going against your value. So if you don't know what you like, you probably know what you don't like and probably know, like you probably know you don't want to be broke, right? Like there's one thing. Okay, so you value stability, right? Like it's a very common thing. It's not shallow. It's a very human thing to value stability, things like that. And if you're not meeting those whys, you're not going to be able to get to the bigger whys if you're not meeting the lower level whys.
Yep. Yeah, it's a ladder of success to having the right felt sense of well-being and having a life that's full of meaning.
Awesome. That feels like a good place to wrap it up. I appreciate your take, Andre. I think, especially on topics like this that are so big and like we're talking, I think we dropped the G word, we dropped the God word there. Like it makes sense to balance that out with some tangible
Yeah.
things. And I always appreciate your approach to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it.
Cool. All right, let's wrap it up.
Okay.
Thanks for sticking around, everybody. We'll talk to you later.